Compliance is a profession where people work tirelessly to make the world a better place. And there are hundreds of amazing and inspiring women who have helped the field develop into what it is today. Great Women in Compliance is part of the Compliance Podcast Network, so join Mary, Shirley, and Lisa Fine as they talk with women in compliance who are making a difference.
Hi, this is Lisa Fine, and you're listening to the Great Women in Compliance podcast on the Compliance Podcast Network. I co-host the podcast with Mary Shirley, and today I have one of Mary's and my all-around favorite people, and somebody who is my mentor, sponsor, advocate, and one of the people that is one of our first two guests. And just really, if you don't know Ellen Hunt, then, get to know her right away, because in a lot of ways, I feel like I have this guest right now who I feel like needs no introduction. But just with that in mind, Ellen is now the Vice President of Compliance Programs Operation and the Chief Privacy Officer at LifePoint Health. Ellen is also a regular speaker. She was formerly at the AARP. She is a leader in our profession and a leader and advocate for all women. So thank you so much for being here. And thank you for coming up with this great topic and talking about what's on your mind right now. So we're just talking a lot right now about a conversation that's coming up in our community pretty regularly, talking about ActiVision and Blizzard, and also how that's put kind of a spotlight or a reflection on our profession, how leadership and how ethics and compliance leaders and also organizational leaders as a whole can respond. So with that, Ellen, I'll let you do a quick introduction and then we'll jump right into it.
Well, thank you, Lisa, for the opportunity to chat with you. I really always enjoy being a guest on the Great Women in Compliance podcast. And as we talked a little bit before, I have just really been very, very troubled and very focused on what's happening in regards to whistleblowers and the impact I think it has for every ethics and compliance program, as well as everybody in a compliance role. I'm just very concerned that when we have situations like ActiVision, that the promise of organizational justice, which is that we say to employees, do the right thing, speak up, tell us when you have concerns, and we won't retaliate against you, really seems to be being exposed publicly and in the newspaper and media in a way where that promise seems to ring hollow. And I think it goes to the core of all of our ethics and compliance programs and to the core of what compliance professionals do. And so I know probably like many of my colleagues, and maybe you too, Lisa, have been involved in speak up campaigns and awareness campaigns to get the word out, to encourage people to come forward. But I'm not sure that we've done a good job really addressing some of the real consequences for doing so. And so I read the news and some of the allegations flying around, not only about ActiVision, but now also the case regarding Governor Cuomo and how some of the people there are being treated for coming forward. And it causes me great concern.
Yeah, I mean, and I agree. And a couple of the things that really were important or resonated with me is the organizational response to the ActiVision Blizzard lawsuit. And particularly, without getting into detail, the compliance response was a really surprising thing to me, because I think one of the things that I think a lot about is trying to be as neutral as you can, but to step out there as a public speaker and to somehow diminish the allegations. I feel like when you talk about making people feel retaliated against, when you have that office or people in our role, how can we do better? I mean, and I feel like that was an example of doing that much more like we're in a litigation, not we are, trying to figure out how to build an ethical and compliant culture.
Yeah, it's really just a very interesting dynamic. And, you and I can't opine as to whether, what's the merit of the allegations, but putting that aside, anybody who raises a concern ought to be treated with respect, and should be given us, amount of dignity to be heard about their concern. And so when you kind of think about this, we understand that organizations want to protect themselves from legal risk and defend themselves against lawsuits, whether they're, have merit or they are meritless. We understand all that, but I'm amazed that this compliance officer felt there was a need to opine on how valid or not valid the lawsuit is. But also, I think there's an underlying attack on people coming forward in general, and a very large chilling effect, which kind of says, look, we asked and answered, or we don't think it's valid, so over and done with. And we know we all work in environments that change. And so maybe they did look into these situations and maybe they found they were without merit. But that doesn't mean that other things haven't arisen. And I know we can all get beaten down sometimes by somebody who's a frequent flyer or a constant complainer, but that doesn't mean that they aren't right the last time. And to me, this just totally undermines the concept of organizational justice. But I also think it sheds all ethics and compliance professionals and ethics and compliance programs in the light of being a sham. How can it be that we promise, on the one hand, freedom from retaliation or fear from retaliation, and then you see organization after organization, and ActiVision isn't the only one, coming after people who have reported. They're either being discredited or they're being demasked. It's really a horrible dynamic. And I give a lot of credit to the employees who felt it was important enough to have a walkout about. There's a lot of hypocrisy here going on, and with an organization saying, on the one hand, speak up, and on the other, when you do, we'll crush you.
Right. And I think one of the things that when Mary Inman, who's leader of the whistleblower practice at Constructive, and she was a guest with Mary on the podcast, and one of the things that she talked about, and I think about this a lot, is when she represents whistleblowers after they become whistleblowers. She's had people in some very large lawsuits, and talks about, be prepared psychologically for what's going to happen to you when you raise your concerns. And what I find just striking about that is that's, first of all, part of the practice. And second of all, how, the psychological pain and challenges that come from that. Just the person who's trying to do the right thing, to be saying to them, we really, as you said, with ethics and compliance professionals, we really want you to do the right thing, but okay, this might, down the line destroy your life, but you're doing the right thing for X organization.
Yeah, it really is a phenomenal situation, and it's been going on for a long time. I have had the pleasure to teach as an adjunct professor at Fordham University, the Introduction to Compliance course. And we spent a lot of time with Wells Fargo, which is old news by now. But unfortunately, the thing that isn't old news is how horribly that organization treated its whistleblowers. And Claudia de Ponce Leon, who was a star performer, promoted like 10 times in 11 years. They not only demasked her and told everybody that she was a reporter, but then they went on a campaign to discredit her, calling her an alcoholic and a poor performer. And some of those folks are still in front of OSHA trying to get their claims settled. And that's another piece of this is, these people are entitled to go through the process and have it done in a timely way. And it's years, maybe even decades for some of these people. And they're still waiting to get these things resolved. And I don't know what it is, Lisa, about the psychology where we feel that somebody who has had the courage to speak the truth, and it may be their truth, And the facts may not always bear them out, but they've had that courage that we feel we have to treat them as a snake, a rat. I mean, we call them whistleblowers, and really ostracize them from society. And I wish we had some brilliant academics or other behavioral scientists to come to the aid of the ethics and compliance profession and tell us, how do we maneuver and navigate protecting the organization from legal risk, but also treat whistleblowers in a much better way? Because frankly, I don't know why anybody wants to come forward given what they see in the news these days.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree with that. And I think that companies, I mean, first of all, I really don't like the term whistleblower. I like to talk about people who are raising concerns because they are on so many different levels. I think what we're talking about now has become such huge, tremendous, endemic, systemic problems that need to be addressed. There are a lot of times that somebody who raises a concern is not, it may not yet be systemic, but could become that. And how, to make sure that those individuals still feel comfortable, moving forward or being able to move forward in an organization. What's happening here, both in terms of ActiVision Blizzard and Governor Cuomo, which is, I'm watching that one. I'm fairly captivated, having been from Buffalo growing up. And for many reasons, but it's just a fascinating thing to realize that his circle around him approach was to isolate him from people who isolate people who might have, quote unquote, been temptation for him, and then try to destroy or hurt others who may be causing an issue down the line. And that, in terms of government and culture and wanting to be a part of it, why would you? Why would you want to do public service? And it's really strange the more you read and the more you see, and that these things are happening and coming out publicly at the same time, are really fascinating to me. And the one other thing I'll say really quickly is that I also feel like a lot of times on this podcast, we talk about all the things we do well as a profession, and there's a lot of that, but this is a place where I think we can do better.
Absolutely. And, when you go back to the beginning of the federal sentencing guidelines, 1990, right? This was a move on the government's part to really, frankly, try to force voluntary compliance, right? It's not legally required. We don't have to have ethics and compliance programs, but we have all picked up that mantle. But it seems that there is a large disconnect, perhaps with the board of directors and management, and maybe also, general counsel, along with outside counsel, on, wait a minute, the idea here really was, and I think remains, you should self-police yourself. You should be given the opportunity to figure out what your issues are and the chance to investigate them and implement corrective actions or other process changes that you need so that these things do not become front page news. And we seem to really not be holding up our end of the bargain on two pieces of this. One is, I think there are certainly organizations that don't investigate these, that don't take them seriously, that engage in the demasking and the discrediting of the reporter because they don't either want to really face the truth of what's going on, or they don't want to invest the time and the energy to make sure it's not going on. And then the other piece is, when these allegations do have some merit, the idea is, well, let's go after the reporter because somehow it's their fault because they told the truth, versus it's the fault of the organization and leadership, as well as maybe some other employees or people associated with the organization. And it just seems to me to be a very immature and ineffective way to deal with this. And here we are 30 years later. And you would think we should be able to get this right by now.
Yeah, I agree with that. I also think, I was just thinking as you're speaking, for women, I think it's even more pronounced and more of a challenge. when you don't speak up, they're considered quiet. If you're speaking up too much, people may call you bossy as opposed to assertive. And when you raise concerns, there's some minimization of it. Do you think, I think women are, that's part of all of ActiVision. And we also see this with what's happening with Governor Cuomo.
Yeah, and your last guest, Sam Kellum, really brought this forward, is that, women still suffer in the workplace and in leadership positions from being characterized for behavior that is lauded and applauded by men, but then held against women. And it's interesting to me when you think maybe about some of the convergence of the Me Too movement, Black Lives Matter, diversity and inclusion, or JEDI, justice, equity, and inclusion, and how these things are all going to come together. We all want to work in a workplace where we're respected, no matter who we are. And you wouldn't think that would actually be such a tremendous challenge for workplaces to achieve. Now, humans don't always treat humans nicely. We know that. But at least at ActiVision, there appears to have been, or certainly acknowledged among employees, if not by the organization or management itself, this real frat culture. And why did it continue? And why wasn't something done about it? And what is the dynamics where people can just shrug their shoulders sometimes and say, well, that's just the culture, so it's okay. Astute business people would say, no, that's not the kind of culture we want, because it's not going to attract the most diverse and the most talent. And why would we want to put ourselves in a position where we're not the employer of choice? It just kind of boggles my mind. I don't really quite understand why this seems to be so difficult for us as organizations to really be able to get our hands around.
I do think one of the challenges for us in ethics and compliance is that oftentimes some of the individuals that are the ones who either define the culture or are the instigators of many of the issues then become people who are sort of a combination of both, really, really strong in their job, and also people who are very charismatic and, have that personality where lots of people, so they like them and they're excellent producers. So then you're going through a challenge that you shouldn't be going through because you've got this discussion. And I think all of us have had it when we're, dealing with a difficult issue or individual, where some people will be saying, look, but this guy, all of our customers love him, and we've made this much money, and if you, I don't know enough about the video games that are a part of this, but if somebody's like their major developer and all this, sometimes they get that carte blanche, and that turns and can really destroy the culture. But I also think you then have that whole controversy as well from the people that like them are like, oh, he could never have done that.
Well, there's definitely a dynamic, and I think we've all seen it. Who's been doing ethics and compliance for a while is delivering the message to a leader or a manager that their star or their friend or their right-hand person is not who they think they may be is always difficult. Often, management will go through a process of denial and then rationalization. And some of that's human nature, because you have a perception of this person as one thing, and what you're being told does not align with that perception. And that's always a difficult conversation. And it's certainly understandable for management to think through what the ramifications of losing a star might be. But what I have always done and had as the other side of the coin of that conversation is they may be a star to you because you're the boss. But people who are toxic cast a very wide net. And you don't really know how many people have left or are thinking of leaving or clock out at 5 o'clock and give the job half the effort, or talk badly about the organization privately or maybe even on social media because your star is not really treating them the right way. And you really have to consider that. And there was a book a number of years ago, and I won't get the title exactly right, but it was basically, the no bullshit rule. And there's a whole chapter in there about how people who are toxic or really behaving in a way that is not respectful bring everybody down. And the cost for that might be hard to measure, but it also can be catastrophic. And you really wonder, I can't remember the exact number of people who walked out. 200 is what in my mind, but that might not be accurate. They were angry enough, upset enough to take to the street with signs about this. How could the organization really not have understood that there was a toxic environment? I mean, putting aside whether you think the lawsuit is valid or not, but it just seems amazing to me that there seemed to be no recognition of what's going on, and I think somebody referred to some of the management's responses tone deaf. It seems more than that. I mean, not only tone deaf, but just completely blind and uncaring to maybe what's happening in the workplace. And it just seems to be counterintuitive to what a good ethics and compliance program should be doing.
Yeah, and I mean, I also think, and not to go back to disparaging or anything about the chief compliance officer, was one of the other interesting moves was that in the middle of last week, she had put an article on Twitter talking about some of the challenges and issues with whistleblowers, and that was right as the walking out. And that brings up sort of two questions for me. One is, how do you think that might be a good idea in the middle of people saying that they're going to be a walkout, and you don't know why, and you don't know how personally attacked an individual is, but sort of disparaging people who raise concerns is always a problem that at least we try with to speak up, but that's even not helping with that part. And the second part is, this is something that our friend Matt Kelly wrote when he talked about this, and I really like this quote. And I want to see what you think, because I think it relates to that comment, is ethics and compliance's job is to stand there and to listen to the allegations, however unfair or ill-informed or flat out nutty they might be, all in the name of building a corporate culture where employees feel comfortable speaking up. It's not about, and this is what I really like, it's not about separating the wheat from the chaff. It's tolerating the chaff so that you can find the wheat. So yeah. I guess the follow-up is, how do you protect the wheat after that?
Well, I think it's spot on. And one of my earlier bosses said to me at one point, where I think I had gone into her office and was kind of, lamenting the frequent flyer complainer. And she said, Ellen, even the paranoid can be stopped. And she said really what Matt is saying in that quote, which is, it may be the 100th time, but they could be right this time. And it's our job to stand there and listen, to be as objective and fair and thorough as we possibly can, and to do what's in the best interest of the organization. And if, that means that we have somebody who just really doesn't understand how to utilize the reporting process and is abusing it, of which I have only seen twice in my 20 plus year career, quite frankly, this idea of bad faith, and really get to the bottom of it. And, sometimes these issues span beyond our protocols, right? Who owns culture, who owns, discrimination or hostile work environment. But the fact of the matter is, how an organization treats its people has to be something that's of concern to the ethics and compliance department. Hopefully you're partnering with HR and legal with this, and working together, and it's collaborative, but sometimes it can get very territorial and siloed, which I think, some of that maybe results in what happened in ActiVision. I mean, I'll tell you, one of the things I thought of when I read some of that correspondence is, are some of these members of management being pressured to say certain things that they maybe do or don't believe, because that maybe positions the company better in regard to the lawsuit? If so, that's not appropriate. That's not appropriate either. But it really gets to the core of organizational justice. And I think Matt's quote is spot on, is, at the end of the day, as ethics and compliance professionals, we're there to protect the reputation of the organization, and you protect it by doing the right thing.
And nothing good can come out of your organization suddenly being the one that's being discussed in this light or this manner. This is exactly one of the things that, when you talk about protecting the organization, that you'd like to avoid. You want people to feel much more comfortable that they don't have to take to the streets or write letters and leak them to the media of, we even disagree with your approach now. You said you've hired lawyers. We don't like, who you've chosen, that you don't want to get to that point. But how much courage it takes to get there, I think sometimes people within organizations or others really ignore.
Yeah. And, we don't know all the facts in the ActiVision case, but, I'm going to harp back to Wells Fargo because it's fresh in my mind, but over 212 cases to the hotline. And they systematically ignored those reports and really went after the reporters to fire them, discredit them, demask them, do all of that. And you have to kind of sit back for a minute and kind of go, things that make you go, So did this just come up and now the employees are taking to the streets? Or has this been really going on for quite a while? And of course, the organization knows, and maybe they've been ineffective in their response or have had no response at all. But this is another one of those, I don't know if you can say it's a dirty little secret, but I bet you could take a poll of ethics and compliance professionals where you've had that case or that series of cases where management is just telling you not to move forward. The people are frequent flyers, they're complainers, they're poor performers, they're whatever. And it's a year, it's 2 years, it's whatever, and it doesn't get done. So this, back to Matt's quote, it's important to listen to people and make them feel heard. So we know from studies that people rarely go outside first. And what they really want is the behavior to stop, right? And maybe you have a few people who want what I call the bossectomy, or
I've never heard that. I love it.
Yeah, or it's a preemptive strike because they do have performance issues. But that's not really, in my experience, it's not the majority. Really, generally, it's people who see a behavior that they think is harming the organization, harming themselves, harming the workplace, and they just want it to stop. And I have always been in the position, frankly, if you are doing thorough, fair, objective investigations, that protects the organization on all these fronts 10 times better than hiring the best lawyer to defend you in the lawsuit.
Yeah. Or to hire the best lawyers to come in and do a workplace evaluation and talk to people and try to improve it. Because by the time you're at that point, people are getting their moment to speak. Some of them may feel that way, but others are just like, this is a whole other step of this that's going to turn out to 4 or 5 constructive things to change things, and the rest of it'll be like less important. But I do think, listen, we've all seen frequent reporters, people who have all the issues you're talking about. That does, as you said, it doesn't mean that there's not something valid in there. Sometimes I think that's a moment of all growth for all of us when you're with that same person, same issue, again and again, to make sure that you're but there is something there that got it started. It may not be the way the reporter defines it or has now allowed it to become necessarily the issue that they believe it is, but there's usually something to at least figure out if it needs to be addressed or handled or differently before it becomes, the front. I mean, back in the day, it was always like the front of the New York Times. Now I'm just not sure if it's just a Google alert or Apple News. You don't want to be the one popping up on the people's phones.
No, and sometimes these issues are not ethics or compliance issues. They end up truly being employee relation issues, right? You have a group of people who just cannot get along. But I will say that for me, I have always thought of good faith, and the way I have defined it in the codes of conduct that I've written and others is that the person had based on the facts that they knew, it was reasonable for them to believe what they alleged. And we know sometimes people don't have all the facts and they haven't been communicated with, and they have jumped to a conclusion. But based on what they know, was it reasonable? And I will tell you, really seriously, only in 2 cases have I seen somebody actually act in true bad faith. It was completely malicious and completely false. And that's another thing that scares me in some of this conversation, which is, well, now we're going to attack the motivations of the reporter and just somehow assume that they're being, or try to prove that they're being vindictive. And I really fear for the ethics and compliance profession if what we do is we veer off from what I think the federal sentencing guidelines are telling us to do, which is back to Matt's quote: listen, figure out what's really there, and fix it. Right? The federal sentencing guidelines are about find and fix, and you don't really do that if you what you do is you run the reporter down to the ground, and you fire them, you embarrass them, you out them. It's just it's really a very dangerous path, I think.
I mean, find and fix. And then I guess the last point that I'd probably just want to end about or talk about is how do we protect them? And I think this is what I want to end with as a thought from you. What do you think, if you were right now, as you're looking at it and thinking about it, what do you think we could do and do better? I mean, how do we do that in our roles and in, knowing as we all do some of the limitations and ability, what do you think we can do better, and what would be even a smaller practical step?
Yeah, so I think there are a number of different things, and it will seem a bit of a scattershot, but I think one of the things that is a flaw in the current legislative regulatory framework is compliance officers themselves are not protected. And so I think that, when the compliance officer leaves, it should be a reportable event, just like when the internal auditor walks away. There should be some checks and balances on public disclosure in regards to that, because I think there's certainly our ethics and compliance professionals who are pressured and influenced to deep six the facts or not address some of these concerns. And I think we need to be those sponsors and those advocates for the reporters. And we also need to have the right gravitas and empowerment within the organization to make the change. So some of that is, of course, your own ability to build relationships and work with others. But I think that we have to be doing some advocacy and some real communicating with our friends in HR and legal counsel, that there has to be a better way to protect the organization from legal risk than what we're doing now. and really engage them in what that might be. And I think it's really is also advocating for boards of directors, for compliance officers to be on board of directors, people who truly understand that the opportunity to be proactive and to cure the problem is as soon as it arises rather than years later, and some real oversight on that. I'm somewhat hopeful that the ESG movement, where some of these numbers might appear in ESG reports, will give some light to that. And then I think in your, on an individual level, what can each and every one of us do? I think they have to go have a conversation with your general counsel or your chief HR person or whoever it is that you work with on some of these issues and talk about, well, gee, let's use this as a case study. What if this had been us? What are we going to do about our investigative protocols and what we're doing to make sure that we're not the next ActiVision? And engage in that conversation before an issue arises, because when you're in the midst of an intense, time-sensitive investigation, is not the time to be, discussing roles and responsibilities. But I think everybody should pull out their investigative protocols and give them a good shake and say, And then on the back end, I think what we do is go case closed. We say appropriate discipline has been administered, and we walk on, and we don't check back in. We don't talk to the manager. We don't talk to the reporter and say, how you doing? Is everything okay? We don't engage in any kind of mediation to rebuild relationships if the reporter's still there, so that trust can be rebuilt and that communication can be rebuilt. And we don't monitor. We don't see if they're taking sick days. We don't see if they're not getting opportunities. We maybe even don't pay attention to see, has their office been moved down to the basement? Gee, did they get passed up for that promotion that we were sure they were going to get? Or, what's really happening with them? So, we have the reporters who we know about who are in the news, but there are good soldiers and very brave, courageous people who still are in the organizations that they came forward about, and they're ostracized and miserable and not treated well. And I think as compliance officers, we need to do better to make sure that those folks are okay and getting help if, whatever help they might need. And in my experience, people who've really raised concerns and they don't stay very long because they're not really treated very well by their coworkers. And we need to do some education and awareness to say we don't tolerate disrespect in our workplace for whatever reason, including the fact that somebody has come forward. So that's, I think those are some steps that we could take.
Well, I mean, it's interesting too, because other employees may come and say, as if so-and-so, reported to the government or did this, and to look at them and say, that was someone's right. They can do that. It's interesting if you've ever seen the look on someone's face after you tell them, that is not something we're going to investigate, whether you think that this person did or did not do something, because, do you realize that's retaliation? I mean, I also think one other point I'd want to add to that is when you're talking about boards and leadership, I mean, I think diversity is really important, breaking up sort of the same network of people who may be promoting each other and promoting a bad culture. I think the more we're doing on that is really critically important.
Agree.
So I do think it's an area of opportunity, as they say in my HR compliance days.
Yeah, it's a huge area. And the one other thing I would just say is I think we need to turn to behavioral science to figure out some of the reasons why we react the way we do. We are all human. But to get to some of the ways in which this could be better is we need to understand some of the emotional intelligence and those feelings behind the actions, so that we can really counsel and monitor in a much more effective way.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for this. I do think one of the things that, Ellen, you told me, and I've mentioned this before, one of the first times I talked to you about substance and careers and futures was you said one of the things is that one of the things as an ethics and compliance professional to keep in mind is sometimes you might have to be prepared to move on if your company doesn't act appropriately. And it's a terrible reality, but I think it's something that shows the courage of the people in our field, because we see people who are willing to do that more often than they'd like. It's an untenable situation. And we hope that none of us are ever put in that position, but I do think about that on a regular basis.
Yeah, and our dear friend Joe Murphy would say that, every ethics and compliance officer ought to have an employment contract so that the terms of when you need to walk away are clear for you. And that's another area where I think that if organizations really support and believe that ethics and compliance is important to their success, they'd be willing to back that up by giving their ethics and compliance officers employment contracts.
Yeah. Well, thank you again for your time. I know how busy you've been, and who knows between the few days that we've recorded this and when it comes out, what will be the next chapter in ActiVision Blizzard and Governor Cuomo. But I'm really so grateful for you altogether and for the time that you take and for what you do for the profession. So I know Mary is too. So on behalf of the Compliance Podcast Network, Mary, Shirley, GWIC, me, and all of us, thanks, Ellen, and I hope everyone has a great day.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Great Women in Compliance. We hope you'll join us in honoring the great women in the compliance field by subscribing to this podcast and leaving a review.